The sound of Marcus Brennan's laughter still echoes in my nightmares. Not the kind of laugh you share with friends over dinner. Not the warm chuckle of someone who's genuinely amused. No, this was the laugh of a man who believed he'd already won. The laugh of a predator standing over prey that had finally stopped struggling. He laughed at me across a courtroom in Chicago, Illinois, in front of a judge, in front of his $800 an hour attorney, in front of God and everyone, because I was sitting there alone. No lawyer, no money, no hope. And he thought I had nothing left. What Marcus didn't know was that 900 miles away in a concrete safe house in rural Montana, my brother, a man Marcus believed was dead, was building a file that would burn Marcus's entire empire to ashes. And in a cramped office in Washington, D.C., a woman Marcus had never heard of was boarding a flight to Chicago with evidence that would make him wish he'd never learned my name. This is the story of how I lost everything, stood alone in front of a judge with nothing but the truth, and watched my family rise from the shadows to deliver the kind of justice that makes grown men weep. Before we dive into how my husband's $1 million smile turned into a face of pure terror in open court, I want to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. I read every single one. And if you believe that underestimating a woman who survived a decade of psychological warfare is a fatal mistake, hit that subscribe button. Because what you're about to hear is one of the most devastating, satisfying revenge stories you'll ever witness. Let's begin. Chicago in February is a special kind of cruel. The wind cuts through your coat like a knife made of ice, and the sky hangs low and gray like a prison ceiling. The Richard J. Daley Center, where the Cook County Circuit Court lives, is a tower of rust-colored steel and glass that rises 648 feet above the frozen streets. Inside, it smells like old coffee, fear, and the faint chemical tang of industrial cleaning products. I'd walked those halls 6 times in 3 months. Each time I felt smaller. My name is Sophia Hale. I'm 34 years old. And on February 14th, Valentine's Day, if you can believe the cruel poetry of it, I sat alone at a wooden table in Courtroom 2104, facing the man I'd loved for 11 years, the man who'd promised to protect me forever, the man who was now systematically destroying my life for sport. Marcus Brennan. Let me paint you a picture of Marcus, because you need to understand exactly who this man was. 45 years old. 6'2". The kind of conventionally handsome that opens doors. Sharp jawline, salt and pepper hair always styled to calculated perfection. Gray eyes that could look warm when he wanted something from you and cold as Lake Michigan in winter when he didn't. He wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His shoes, Italian leather, custom, clicked against the marble floors like a countdown timer. On his wrist, a Patek Philippe watch that he'd bought himself as a reward for closing a deal that made him $3.2 million in a single afternoon. Marcus was a venture capitalist. He'd built his reputation on finding struggling tech startups, pouring money into them, taking controlling interest, and then either flipping them for massive profit or gutting them for parts. He was brilliant at it, ruthless, and everyone in Chicago's business circles knew his name. Sitting beside him was his attorney, Victor Kemp, a man whose very presence made the air feel heavier. Kemp was in his late 50s, with thinning hair slicked back with too much product, and a face that looked like it had been carved from wet clay and left to harden in a permanent sneer. He specialized in high-net-worth divorces. His win rate was 94%. He destroyed people for a living, and he was very, very good at it. Across the aisle from them sat me. Just me. I wore a simple black dress, one of 3 outfits I'd managed to grab before Marcus changed the locks on our penthouse. My dark blonde hair was pulled into a low ponytail because I couldn't afford to get it cut anymore. No jewelry except my wedding ring, which I still wore like an idiot, like some part of me still believed this was all a misunderstanding. My hands were folded on the table in front of me, and if you looked closely, you'd see they were shaking. The Honorable Catherine Morales presided over the courtroom from her elevated bench. She was 63, with steel gray hair cut short and sharp, and reading glasses that she peered over when she wanted to make you feel like you were wasting her time. She'd been a judge for 18 years. She'd seen everything. Heard every lie, every sob story, every desperate play for sympathy. She cleared her throat, and the room went silent. "This is the matter of Hale versus Brennan," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of institutional authority that makes your spine straighten involuntarily. "We're here for the final hearing regarding dissolution of marriage, division of assets, custody of one German shepherd named Atlas, and resolution of all outstanding financial claims." My chest tightened at the mention of Atlas's name. Atlas. Playboy. My 4-year-old German shepherd with the intelligent brown eyes and the way he'd rest his chin on my knee when I cried. The dog I'd rescued from a kill shelter 3 years ago, who'd been abused so badly, he wouldn't let anyone touch him for the first 6 months. The dog who finally learned to trust again because I'd sat with him every single day, speaking softly, moving slowly, showing him that not all humans were monsters. Marcus had taken him from me. Not because he wanted Atlas. Marcus had never liked the dog. He'd complained about the hair, the vet bills, the way Atlas would bark when Marcus raised his voice at me. No, Marcus took Atlas because he knew it would hurt me. Because Atlas was the one thing in that penthouse that loved me unconditionally, and Marcus couldn't tolerate that. Victor Kemp stood, buttoning his suit jacket with theatrical precision. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey. "My client, Mr. Marcus Brennan, has been extraordinarily patient throughout these proceedings. He's offered Mrs. Hale multiple generous settlement packages, temporary housing assistance, a modest financial sum to help her transition to independent living. She has rejected every single offer." He paused, letting that sink in. "Furthermore, Mrs. Hale has made numerous baseless accusations regarding my client's character, his business practices, and his treatment of her during their marriage. These accusations are not only false, they're defamatory. And perhaps most telling of all, Mrs. Hale has been unable to secure legal representation, which we believe reflects either an unwillingness to engage in good faith negotiations or..." He glanced at me with barely concealed contempt, an inability to substantiate her claims with actual evidence. Marcus nodded along, his expression one of wounded nobility. Like he was the victim here. Like I was some unhinged woman who'd gone off the rails and was now wasting everyone's time with paranoid fantasies. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and tell the judge everything. How Marcus had spent years slowly isolating me from my friends, how he'd convinced me to quit my job as a non-profit fundraising coordinator because we don't need the money and I want you home. How he'd monitored my phone, my email, my every movement. How he'd whispered in my ear at night that I was lucky he put up with me, that no one else would ever want someone as broken as I was. But I couldn't say any of that. 'Cause I had no proof. Because emotional abuse doesn't leave bruises you can photograph. Because Marcus was smart enough to never leave a trail. Judge Morales turned her gaze to me, and I felt my stomach drop. "Mrs. Hale," she said, her tone careful, measured, "is it accurate that you are representing yourself in this proceeding?" I stood slowly. My legs felt like they might give out. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. My voice came out quieter than I intended. "And can you explain to the court why you have not retained legal counsel?" This was it. The moment Marcus had been waiting for. Took a breath. "Because my husband froze all of our joint bank accounts, Your Honor. He locked me out of our home. He canceled every credit card with my name on it. He made sure I couldn't access any funds to hire an attorney." Victor Kemp actually laughed. A short, derisive sound. "Your Honor, that is a gross misrepresentation of..." "I'm not finished," I said, and my voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. The room went silent. Even Kemp looked momentarily surprised. Judge Morales raised one eyebrow. "Go on, Mrs. Hale." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but I forced myself to keep going. He also forged my signature on legal documents transferring ownership of our home into his name alone. He did the same thing with Atlas's registration papers. And for the past 7 years, he's been hiding assets in offshore accounts. Money he's laundered through shell companies in the Cayman Islands and Singapore. Marcus's smile faltered. Just for a second. Just long enough for me to see the flash of something dangerous in his eyes. Kemp was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, these are extraordinarily serious allegations being made without a single shred of supporting evidence. This is nothing more than a desperate woman grasping at straws. Judge Morales looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Mrs. Hale, do you have evidence to support these claims? And this was the moment where everything hung in the balance. Not with me, Your Honor, I admitted. But it exists. Marcus didn't just laugh this time. He threw his head back and let out a sound that echoed off the courtroom walls, a bark of genuine, delighted laughter. This is absolutely unbelievable, he said, shaking his head like he'd just heard the funniest joke of his life. She's got nothing. No lawyer, no proof, no case. She's just making things up and hoping something sticks. He turned to his lawyer, still grinning. Can we please just end this circus and move on? Judge Morales's jaw tightened. I could see her knuckles go white as she gripped her gavel. Mr. Brennan, she said, her voice dropping 10 degrees. You will remain silent unless you are called upon to speak. Do I make myself clear? Marcus held up his hands in mock apology, but that smirk never left his face. I sat down slowly, feeling the weight of the entire room pressing down on my shoulders. Had nothing. No documents, no lawyer, no leverage. Just my word against a man who'd spent years building walls around his secrets. But deep in my chest, beneath the fear and humiliation and crushing sense of powerlessness, there was something else. Oh. Because 3 days ago, I'd received a text message from a number I didn't recognize. It said, I'm coming. Hold the line. I didn't know the number, but I knew the words. I knew the cadence, the rhythm, the way those particular letters arranged themselves into that particular promise. My brother, Ethan Hale. The brother I hadn't seen in 7 years. The brother Marcus didn't know existed because I'd never told him. The brother who'd made me a promise the last time I saw him, standing in a parking lot outside a military base in North Carolina. If you ever need me, truly need me, you call. I don't care where I am or what I'm doing. I'll come. And I'd called. And Ethan Hale didn't make promises he couldn't keep. Let me take you back. Because you need to understand how I got here. I met Marcus when I was 23 years old. Fresh out of college with a degree in communications and a head full of dreams about making the world better. I was working at a non-profit that provided legal aid to domestic violence survivors. The pay was terrible, the hours were long, but I loved it. I felt like I was doing something that mattered. Marcus came into my life like a force of nature. He was 34, already wildly successful, and he walked into a charity gala I'd helped organize like he owned the building. Which, it turned out, he kind of did. His investment firm had donated $200,000 to our cause. He was charming, attentive. He asked me questions about my work and actually listened to the answers. He made me feel seen in a way I'd never experienced before. Our first date was at a Michelin-starred restaurant I'd only read about in magazines. He ordered wine that cost more than my monthly rent and told me stories about traveling through Southeast Asia, building schools in rural villages, mentoring young entrepreneurs. Fell hard. Rest. We were married within a year. First, everything was perfect. Marcus encouraged me to keep working, said he admired my passion. We lived in a beautiful loft in River North. We traveled. We hosted dinner parties with interesting people who talked about art and politics and changing the world. But slowly, so slowly I didn't notice it happening, things began to change. Started with small comments. That dress makes you look a little heavy, don't you think? Your friends from work are kind of basic, aren't they? I don't love how much time you're spending at the office. I miss you. Then came the suggestions. Why don't you work from home a couple days a week? You know, we don't really need your income. What if you went part-time? I think it would be good for us if you focused more on our life together. And because I loved him, because I wanted to make him happy, because he made it all sound so reasonable, I said yes. I went part-time. Then I quit entirely. And that's when the cage door closed. Once I stopped working, Marcus became my entire world. And he was very, very good at making sure it stayed that way. He convinced me we should move to a penthouse in the Gold Coast. Better security, better schools for when we have kids. But the new place was farther from my friends. Harder to get to without a car. And Marcus controlled the car. He set up all our finances in joint accounts, then slowly shifted everything into accounts with only his name. It's just easier for taxes, he'd say. Don't worry, sweetheart. What's mine is yours. Except it wasn't. My phone was on his plan. My credit cards were attached to his accounts. Even my health insurance was through his company. I didn't realize it at the time, but Marcus had systematically made me financially dependent on him in every possible way. And then came the monitoring. He installed an app on my phone. Just so I can make sure you're safe. He'd check my location constantly. If I went somewhere unexpected, even just to a different grocery store, he'd call. Hey babe, where are you? I was worried. He had access to my email, my social media. He knew every person I talked to, every website I visited. My friends started to fade away. Not all at once. Marcus was too smart for that. But little by little, he'd create conflicts. He'd schedule trips during their birthday parties. He'd pick fights with me right before I was supposed to meet them for coffee, and I'd have to cancel because I was too emotionally drained. When my best friend Sarah finally confronted me, asking if everything was okay, if Marcus was controlling me, I defended him. I told her she didn't understand. That Marcus just cared about me so much he wanted to protect me. Sarah stopped calling after that. And I was alone. The real nightmare started a year ago. I'd been feeling isolated, depressed. I told Marcus I wanted to adopt a dog, something to keep me company during the days when he was at work. He'd resisted at first, but I pushed. It was the first time in years I'd insisted on something. We went to a shelter, and that's where I found Atlas. He was 3 years old, a German Shepherd mix who'd been seized from a dogfighting ring. He was terrified of everyone. He'd been beaten, starved, used as a bait dog to train fighters. The shelter staff said he'd probably never trust humans again. They were planning to euthanize him. I looked into his eyes and I saw myself. I brought him home. For months, Atlas wouldn't let me touch him. He'd cower in the corner, flinching at any sudden movement. But I was patient. I'd sit on the floor across the room from him and just talk. I'd leave food out and slowly move it closer to where I sat. Play soft music and read books aloud. And slowly, he began to trust me. The day Atlas first rested his head on my lap, I cried for an hour. He became everything to me. My companion, my purpose. The only living thing in that penthouse that loved me without conditions or control. Marcus hated it. He'd complain about the hair on the furniture. He'd forget to let Atlas out when I asked. He'd raise his voice around the dog just to watch him cower. And then 10 months ago I made a mistake. I told Marcus I wanted to leave. Not dramatically. Not with accusations or anger. I just said quietly over breakfast that I thought maybe we needed some time apart. That I wasn't happy. That I wanted to try therapy. Marcus's face went blank. Completely blank. Like a mask had fallen over his features. Okay, he said calmly. If that's what you want. I should have known better. 2 days later, I came home from walking Atlas to find the locks changed. My key didn't work. I called Marcus, and he answered on the first ring. "Oh, sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is my home. It's in my name. You'll need to find somewhere else to stay." "Marcus, we can't. And Atlas will be staying here with me. He's registered in my name after all. If you try to take him, I'll have you arrested for theft." My blood went cold. "You can't do this." "I already did. Your things are being packed up as we speak. You can pick them up from storage next week. I'll text you the address." "Marcus, please." He hung up. I stood outside that building for 3 hours, calling him over and over, begging the doorman to let me in. They wouldn't. They'd been given instructions. That night Marcus sent me a video. In the video, Atlas was locked in a wire kennel in the basement. The kennel was too small. Atlas could barely turn around. He was whining, pawing at the door. And Marcus's voice came from off-camera. "This is what happens when you forget who's in charge, Sophia. This is what happens when you try to leave me. Maybe a few days down here will help you remember your place. And maybe it'll help you remember his." I watched that video 50 times, sobbing, before I finally called the one person I thought could help. My mother. But my mother didn't answer. She hadn't answered my calls in years. Not since I'd married Marcus against her advice. Not since I'd cut her off for trying to interfere in my relationship. So I called the police. They told me it was a civil matter. That Atlas was registered in Marcus's name. So technically he had every right to keep the dog. That unless I could prove abuse, there was nothing they could do. I was trapped. I stayed in a motel for 2 weeks, spending money I didn't have. Then Marcus's lawyer sent me a letter. It said that Marcus was filing for divorce. That he was claiming I'd abandoned the marriage. That he was seeking full ownership of all marital assets, including Atlas. And that's when I called Ethan. I hadn't spoken to my brother in 7 years. Not because we'd fought. Not because of some dramatic falling out. But because Ethan had a job that made regular contact impossible. Ethan Hale was a ghost. That's not an official designation. The military doesn't use that term. But that's what people called the members of his unit. Special Activities Division. Tier 1 operators who did things in places the government would never acknowledge, against enemies who officially didn't exist. Ethan had joined the Navy when he was 18. By the time he was 25, he was a SEAL. By 30, he'd been recruited into something deeper, darker, more classified. I didn't know the details of what he did. Couldn't know. But I knew that when Ethan called me from a satellite phone on my birthday, the call was encrypted. I knew that sometimes I wouldn't hear from him for 8 months at a time. I knew that once, when he'd come home on leave, he'd had scars I'd never seen before and a look in his eyes that made me afraid to ask questions. Ethan was 41 now. Broad-shouldered, 6'1", with dark hair cut military short and eyes the color of storm clouds. He had a tattoo on his left forearm. Coordinates that didn't appear on any map. And he had a voice that could sound gentle when he was talking to me and terrifying when he wasn't. The last time I'd seen him was 7 years ago, right before my wedding. He'd pulled me aside at the rehearsal dinner, away from Marcus and the guests and the champagne. "Sophia," he'd said quietly, "I don't trust him." "You don't even know him," I'd protested. "I know his type. I know what men like him do. And I'm asking you, please don't marry him." I'd been furious. I'd told Ethan he was being paranoid, overprotective, that he didn't understand civilian relationships because he'd been in the military too long. We'd fought. I'd said things I regretted. And Ethan had left early before the wedding. But before he left, he'd given me a phone. Burner phone. Old-fashioned, flip style, with a single number programmed into it. "If you ever need me," he'd said, "call this number. I don't care where I am. I don't care what I'm doing. I'll come." I'd thrown that phone in a drawer and tried to forget about it. Until 10 months ago, when I was sitting in a motel room with no money, no home, and a video of my dog being tortured, and I remembered. I dug through my boxes until I found it. The battery was dead, but I charged it overnight. And at 2 a.m., with my hands shaking so hard I could barely dial, I called. Rang once. Then Ethan's voice. Sophia. And I broke. I told him everything. The isolation. The control. The locked accounts. Changed locks. The video. Marcus's lawyer. The divorce filing. All of it came pouring out in a flood of words and tears. Ethan listened in silence. When I finally stopped talking, he said, "Where are you right now?" Told him. "Stay there. Lock the door. Don't talk to anyone. I'll handle this." "Ethan, I don't have money for a lawyer." "I don't have." I said, "I'll handle it. Do you trust me?" "Yes." "Then hold the line. I'm coming." The call ended. And for 6 months, I didn't hear from him again. But I knew Ethan. I knew that when he said he was coming, he meant it. I knew that somewhere, in some windowless room in some part of the world I couldn't imagine, my brother was building something. And Marcus Brennan had no idea what was about to hit him. Word count. 4,458/target. 6,000. Part 3. Act 3. Climax. Justice and resolution. Cavalry arrives. Back in that courtroom, with Marcus still smirking and Judge Morales looking at me with something dangerously close to pity, I felt the walls closing in. Kemp was standing again, delivering what was clearly meant to be his final argument. "Your Honor," he said, his voice oozing false sympathy, "I think we've wasted enough of this court's valuable time. Mrs. Hale has made wild accusations without a shred of evidence. She's rejected every reasonable settlement offer. She's chosen to represent herself despite clearly being in over her head." He gestured toward me like I was an exhibit in a museum. "We respectfully request that the court grant Mr. Brennan full ownership of the marital residence, full custody of the dog Atlas, and division of all jointly held assets as outlined in our initial filing. Mrs. Hale can walk away with the settlement we've offered, which I should note is far more generous than she deserves." Marcus nodded, his arms crossed, looking for all the world like a man who'd just won the lottery. Judge Morales turned to me. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the resignation in her eyes. She'd seen this story before. She knew how it ended. "Mrs. Hale," she said slowly, "do you have anything to say before I make my ruling?" I stood on legs that felt like water. "Your Honor," I said, and I hated how small my voice sounded. "I know I don't have a lawyer. I know I don't have evidence here in front of you. But everything I've said is true. Marcus has stolen from me. He's lied to this court. He's holding my dog hostage to punish me for trying to leave." My voice cracked. I could feel tears building behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Not here. Not in front of him. I don't have much left," I continued. "But I'm begging you. Please give me a chance to prove it. Please don't let him win just because he has more money." Marcus actually laughed. Again. Louder this time. "This is pathetic," he said, not even bothering to lower his voice. "She's got absolutely nothing, and she's up here crying about fairness like this is a Disney movie." Judge Morales's eyes flashed dangerously. "Mr. Brennan," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "I will hold you in contempt if you speak out of turn one more time." Marcus raised his hands in mock surrender, but that infuriating smirk never left his face. The judge looked back at me, and I saw something in her expression that made my heart sink. Sympathy. She believed me. Or at least she wanted to believe me. But without evidence, without representation, there was nothing she could do. "Mrs. Hale," she began gently, "I understand this is difficult, but without evidence, without legal representation, I cannot." Bang. The courtroom doors flew open with a sound like a gunshot. Every head in the room turned. A man stood in the doorway. 6'1", broad shoulders, wearing dark cargo pants, a black jacket, and an expression that could freeze fire. Ethan. My brother walked into that courtroom like he owned it. His boots made no sound on the floor, a habit from years of moving through hostile territory, but his presence filled the space like a physical force. Behind him came someone else. Woman. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a charcoal power suit and carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my motel room. She had the kind of face that had seen courtrooms from every angle and never flinched. She walked past Ethan and straight to the front of the room. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and commanding, "I apologize for the dramatic entrance. My name is Victoria Cross, and I'm here to represent the respondent, Mrs. Sophia Hale." The room went absolutely silent. I couldn't breathe. Victor Kemp shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Who is this woman, and are you a licensed attorney in the state of Illinois, Ms. Cross?" Judge Morales interrupted, her tone sharp. Victoria reached into her briefcase and pulled out a document, walking it directly to the bench with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "Licensed in Illinois, New York, and D.C., Your Honor," she said smoothly. "And I filed an emergency motion to enter this case as counsel of record as of 9 a.m. this morning." Judge Morales took the document, scanned it quickly, and nodded. "Motion granted. Ms. Cross, you may proceed." Marcus leaned toward Kemp, his voice a harsh whisper that carried across the silent courtroom. "Who the hell is she?" Kemp had gone pale. "That's Victoria Cross. She's a legend. She's argued in front of the Supreme Court. She's never lost a family law case. Ever." Marcus's face drained of color. Victoria walked to the respondent's table and set her briefcase down beside me. She turned, and for the first time she looked directly at me. Her eyes were kind, fierce. She placed a hand on my shoulder just for a moment and whispered, "Breathe. I've got you now." Then she turned to face the judge. "Your Honor," she began, "I apologize for my late entry into this case. But I assure you what I'm about to present will more than justify the delay." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. "Over the past 6 months, Mrs. Hale's brother, Mr. Ethan Hale, a decorated special operations veteran, has conducted an exhaustive investigation into Mr. Marcus Brennan's financial and legal conduct. What we've uncovered is not merely marital misconduct. It's a criminal enterprise." Marcus stood abruptly. "This is insane. Your Honor." "Sit down." Judge Morales's voice cracked like a whip. Marcus sat. Victoria continued, her voice calm, methodical, devastating. "Mr. Brennan has systematically hidden assets in offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Singapore, and Luxembourg. He has committed tax evasion on a scale that would interest the IRS tremendously. He has laundered money through shell companies. And most relevantly to this case," she pulled out a document. "He forged my client's signature on multiple legal documents, including the deed to their home and the registration papers for their dog." Kemp was on his feet. "Your Honor, these are slanderous." "They're documented facts," Victoria said coolly. She turned to the back of the courtroom. "And the man who documented them is here to testify." Ethan stepped forward. He walked down the center aisle of that courtroom like he was walking into enemy territory. Calm, controlled, ready for anything. Judge Morales looked at him with undisguised curiosity. "And you are?" "Ethan Hale, Your Honor. United States Navy, retired. Special Activities Division. 23 years of service." His voice was quiet, but it carried weight. "And Sophia's brother." I couldn't hold it back anymore. Tears streamed down my face. Ethan's eyes found mine across the courtroom, and he smiled. Just a little. Just enough. Victoria gestured to him. Mr. Hale has spent the last 6 months gathering evidence. Your Honor, if you'll permit. He has documentation to present. Judge Morales nodded slowly. Approach. Ethan walked to the bench and set down a leather folder. The judge opened it. Her eyes widened. Page after page. Bank statements. Wire transfer records. Emails. Forensic accounting reports. Recorded phone conversations. Her expression shifted from surprise to disbelief to cold, pure anger. Mr. Kemp, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Does your client have an explanation for these offshore accounts? Kemp stammered. Your Honor, I was not made aware of. Does your client have an explanation for the forged signatures? Marcus stood, his voice shaking. This is a setup. That's not. Continue. 4:03 p.m. This is all fabricated. Victoria pulled out another document. Your Honor, we also have testimony from a forensic handwriting expert, 2 former employees of Mr. Brennan's firm willing to testify under oath, and, she paused for effect, a video recording from the security system in the marital home. Marcus's face went white as snow. What video? He whispered. Victoria smiled. It was not a kind smile. The video, she said, of you locking Atlas in a kennel in the basement and verbally threatening my client. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Morales slammed her gavel. Silence. She turned to the clerk. Play it. The clerk took the USB drive Victoria handed her and loaded it onto the courtroom's display system. The screen flickered to life. And there it was. Marcus's voice filled the courtroom. This is what happens when you forget who's in charge, Sophia. This is what happens when you try to leave me. Maybe a few days down here will help you remember your place. Atlas's whining echoed through the speakers. I covered my mouth with both hands, trying not to sob out loud. When the video ended, the silence was deafening. Judge Morales removed her glasses slowly. She looked at Marcus with an expression of pure contempt. Mr. Brennan, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I have presided over this court for 18 years. Have seen liars. Have seen abusers. I have seen men who use the law as a weapon to control and punish. She leaned forward. But you, sir, are among the worst. Marcus opened his mouth to speak. I am ordering an immediate freeze on all your accounts pending a full investigation by the district attorney's office. I am awarding full ownership of the marital residence to Mrs. Sophia Hale. I am awarding full custody of the dog Atlas to Mrs. Hale. I am issuing a restraining order preventing you from coming within 500 feet of my client. And I am referring this case to the United States Attorney for possible federal charges related to fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. She slammed her gavel so hard I felt it in my bones. This case is closed. The courtroom exploded. Marcus was on his feet, shouting something I couldn't hear over the noise. Kemp was trying to pull him toward the exit. Reporters who'd been sitting in the back rushed forward. But Marcus turned back. His eyes locked on mine across the courtroom. This isn't over, he snarled. You think you've won. You think. Ethan stepped directly into his path. For a long moment, the 2 men stood face to face. Marcus was taller, broader, richer. But Ethan was something else entirely. Yeah, Ethan said, his voice soft and deadly calm. It is. Marcus stared at him for 3 heartbeats. Then he turned and walked out, his lawyer scrambling after him. I don't remember leaving the courtroom. I remember Ethan's hand on my shoulder, guiding me through the crowd. I remember Victoria walking beside me like a shield. I remember the cold February air hitting my face when we stepped outside, and how it felt like being born again. We stood on the courthouse steps. Me, Ethan, and this woman who'd walked into my life like an avenging angel. Who are you? I finally managed to ask Victoria. She smiled. A friend of your brother's. And someone who doesn't like bullies. Ethan cleared his throat. Victoria and I served together. Different units, but we worked the same circles. When I told her what was happening, she agreed to help. I don't charge family, Victoria said simply. I started crying again. Not sad tears this time. Relief, gratitude, disbelief that this was real. Ethan pulled me into a hug, and I sobbed into his shoulder like I was 8 years old again. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry I pushed you away. Shoo, he said quietly. You're here now. That's all that matters. How did you do it? I asked when I could finally speak again. How did you find all that evidence? Ethan pulled back, his hands on my shoulders. Do you really want to know? Thought about it. About the skills he'd learned in places I couldn't imagine. About the things he'd done that the government would never acknowledge. No, I said. I just want to say thank you. He smiled. Then you're welcome. Marcus was arrested 6 weeks later. Federal agents raided his office at 6 a.m. on a Wednesday. They seized his computers, his files, his phones. They froze every account. They confiscated the Patek Philippe watch right off his wrist. The charges were extensive. Wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, securities fraud, and falsifying documents. His face was all over the news. His firm collapsed within days. Clients fled. Business partners scrambled to distance themselves. The trial took 11 months. He was found guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 14 years in federal prison. I didn't go to the sentencing. I didn't need to. Victoria texted me the news and I sat on my porch, on the porch of the house that was legally, undeniably mine, and I felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not vindication. Just peace. 3 days after the courtroom hearing, Ethan and I drove to Marcus's penthouse. Now my penthouse. Ethan had called ahead. Marcus's belongings had been removed by movers. The locks had been changed. When I walked through that door, Atlas was waiting. He'd been staying with a professional trainer Victoria had arranged. He was clean, healthy, and the moment he saw me, he ran. I dropped to my knees, and he crashed into me, nearly knocking me over. His whole body wiggled. He licked my face. He made sounds I'd never heard from him before. Little whines of pure joy. I buried my face in his fur and cried. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching, his arms crossed. You good? He asked. Yeah, I said. I'm good. 6 months after the trial ended, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Lincoln Park when my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Sophia Hale. A woman's voice. Yes. My name is Rebecca Lynn. I'm calling because I read about your case in the news. About what happened with your husband. And I need help. My chest tightened. I'm not a lawyer, I said gently. I know. But you survived. And I need to know how. We talked for an hour. By the end of the call, I'd given her Victoria Cross's contact information. And I'd promised to meet her for coffee the following week. That was the first one. Over the next year there were 43 more. Women and some men who'd read my story. Who were trapped in their own versions of hell. Who needed someone to tell them it was possible to escape. I couldn't save them all. I wasn't a lawyer or a therapist or a miracle worker. But I could listen. I could connect them with resources. I could sit across from them in coffee shops and tell them the truth. You are not crazy. You are not alone. And there is a way out. With Victoria's guidance and Ethan's security expertise, I started a non-profit. We called it the Atlas Project. We provided legal referrals, safety planning, emergency housing assistance, and trauma counseling for survivors of financial and psychological abuse. Ethan helped set up our security protocols. Victoria served on our board. And slowly, one person at a time, we started helping people escape. It wasn't revenge. It was something better. It was purpose. It's February again. Valentine's Day. I'm standing on the same courthouse steps where this whole thing began, but this time I'm here by choice. I'm here with 12 other women and 3 men, all survivors who've gone through our program. We're holding a press conference to announce new legislation we helped draft, the Financial Abuse Prevention Act. If it passes, it'll make it harder for abusers to freeze accounts, forge signatures, or financially trap their partners. Ethan is standing off to the side, watching. He's wearing civilian clothes, but he still scans the crowd like he's looking for threats. Old habits. Victoria is at the podium, speaking to reporters about the bill. And beside me, wagging his tail and wearing a service dog vest, is Atlas. He's a certified therapy dog now. He comes with me to support groups, to shelters, to courtrooms where scared people need to know they're not alone. A reporter approaches me when the press conference ends. "Mrs. Hale," she says, "what would you say to other people who are trapped the way you were?" I think about it for a moment. Then I say, "I'd tell them that you are stronger than you know, that the people who try to destroy you are counting on you staying silent. And that somewhere out there, there's someone who will show up for you when you need them most." I glance at Ethan. "Victoria. Atlas. You just have to hold the line long enough for them to arrive." If this story gave you chills, if it made you believe that even in the darkest moments there's still hope, I need you to do something for me. Smash that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And drop a comment below telling me, what's the bravest thing you've ever done? I read every single comment. Your stories inspire me. And if you want more stories like this, stories about people who refused to give up, who fought back against impossible odds, who proved that justice is still possible, hit that subscribe button. Because we're just getting started. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, you are never too lost to be found.